Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I wanted to just quickly reintroduce myself in case this is the first time you are tuning in. I am here as an ex Jehovah's Witness activist. I am very excited for today's video. And I will say, before you watch this one, if you have not yet watched my introductory video, especially, maybe now's a good time to pause and go check that one out. Just a brief recap. I am, or I was, excuse me, raised as a Jehovah's Witness in a divided house. So my mom was a witness, my dad was disfellowshipped. I was baptized at 11, regular pioneering by 12, and then I was disfellowshipped the first time when I was 21. At the end of my last video, that's kind of where I was starting that, or ending that conversation was there at that point in my life. So what I thought I would do today is I would pick up from there, because that's really where who I was, who I started to find out that I was, kind of was at that point. So when I was disfellowshipped at, it was 2021, right in there, my mom passed away, as I talked about in my last video, when had been out for not quite a year. That was really difficult, but I had made friends. I had friends that were both, worldly, like coworkers and all that good stuff. But I also had kind of gotten reacquainted with a few other people that I had like grown up with, that they themselves were now disfellowshipped. And so that was this kind of like comfort, because I was going through somewhat of a grieving process over losing my mom and being disfellowshipped, really not having my family. And so having people who had known them and known me really brought a level of comfort that is hard to explain unless you've really been there before. You didn't have to talk a whole lot about like the issues or the pain or the anxiety you were feeling. You didn't have to verbalize it too much with them, because obviously they understood firsthand. So at the same time, I was in my 20s and I was still, feeling things out. I was still going out and having a good time and meeting other people. So even though I was grieving and I loved my mom and I missed her, because I was being shunned during that time that she passed, there was a part of me, and no offense at all to people that are young, but for me personally, when I was that age, I just kind of like ignored it, right? Like I didn't go through as intense of a grieving process as a normal person would. I just kind of tried to ignore it and push it down and just keep partying and keep working and all that good stuff. So during this time, the other thing is I had really thrown myself into my day job, into my career. And I was doing really pretty well with it, and I enjoyed it. It didn't pay a whole lot at that time, and so I was working some other jobs. Like I was working nights with like at the music store in the mall and just a couple other odds and ends. But and this is important for me to talk about, like the fact that I was working like in an office in a formal job and really trying to put my best foot forward in that career, because through the years that would be the one thing that really stayed solid in my life, is my work ethic and being able to build off that career and give myself some self-confidence and independence. So I'm living on my own and I'm doing this, and I'm young, so I'm still like, able to go out and on the weekends and sometimes during the week. Don't tell my old boss. and then, you know, work full time. So I meet up as I closed out my last video. I reconnected and met up. Gonna go back. No, that's fine. I reconnected and met up with someone I had grown up with and who had been like really good friends with my brothers. He was, of course, older than me because my brothers are older than me, and we dated. I felt like it was kind of awkward because I thought I knew him so well. And so before we got like serious, I broke it off and I said, you know, let's like just be friends. It, I guess, hurt his feelings, and so he didn't talk to me for a while. Like, we would see each other out and about, but we weren't hanging out as friends even anymore. So then fast forward, I date a few other people, um, live all kinds of different adventures, bartending, just really getting comfortable in my own skin. During this time, my brother John, who was closest in age to me, he and I, when I was disfellowshipped, had like reconnected very closely, and we just like became extremely close. We'd always been close my whole life, as I talked about in my other videos. But then we both, you know, we only had each other because all of our family was shunning us. And so we just were like thick as thieves. And I was at his house one night, and he was working on his car, and we're like hanging out in his garage, and I'm, you know, we're like drinking beer and he's working on his car, and I something came up about like the witnesses. I don't even know what it was. It was maybe like a family member had reached out to me about the memorial coming up or something. And so I said that to him. I said like, oh, you know, like the memorial, or maybe the circuit overseer or something. And so I said, you know, it's like next week, and are you going to go? And I remember distinctly, he just like pushed himself out because he was laying on one of those things that goes under the car. And he just pushed himself out, and he was laying on the floor, and he just looked at me, and he got this like smirk, and he goes, you can believe in that religion if you want, but I will never go back to that. He's like, Johanna, we were raised in a cult. And I remember like alarm bells going off in my head, and I was like, no, don't, like, I can't hear that. I can't listen to it. But I didn't say anything. I was just like, okay, you know, if that's what you think. And then he just like harumphed and then like pushed himself back under the car and kept working. And we didn't really talk anymore about it at that point. I just was like, okay, I'm going to let it go. So a couple more years after this, so now we're up to where I'm 26, and I reconnect with the family friend who I had dated briefly and then like broken it off with. We reconnect, and he's like, you know, we should hang out. And I was like, yeah, we should totally hang out. So we did, and then we like started dating. And then he told me his dad was sick with cancer again, and he was really upset about it. His mom and dad were very devout, but they kind of soft shunned him. Like, they would still talk to him once in a while because he was their only child. They had lost a daughter when she was young. And so since he was their only child, they just kind of soft shunned him. Like, they didn't really talk to him, but every once in a while they'd check in to see how he was, and if they knew if he knew if they needed something, you know, they would like come to him. So he was really close with his parents, and I'll talk about more later. It was a dysfunctional relationship, but regardless, his dad was sick and he was very worried about it. So we start dating officially again. And my first red flag should have been when I confided in him about the fact that all those years that I had been molested, that it was by my oldest brother, that he said, like, oh, that's awful, but I think I remember around the time that you must have said something, because he and I hung out not too long after that, and he just said things were really a mess, and he was really upset and sorry about stuff that he'd done in his past. And he said, I'm sure he just seemed really sorry. So, like, you should probably, basically, he didn't say it, but it was like, you need to just, like, move on, get over it, let it go. This should have been my first flag. But I was just like, okay, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe he's right, because I'd heard that so much. And at this point in my life, my family was back to, like, since my brother was never disfellowshipped, there had been a strained relationship in my family, but they were back to, like, he was coming back into the state to visit my mom and my family. They had gone to see him. Like, I mean, so I had this, like, overwhelming feeling of, like, I needed to just get over it. I needed to let it go. It was this battle inside of me. And so here's this guy I'm dating. He'd known all of us, supposedly cares about me, but he's telling me the same thing. And so that was really difficult to hear, but I just kind of thought, well, he wants to be a witness again, because at that time, he and I were both physically out, mentally in the organization. And so I was like, well, he's like just trying to look out for my spirituality or something. I don't know. So my next red flag should have been that one night he and I went to the local, like, watering hole, and it was a place, he was a regular. It was not too far from where he lived. And I go to the ladies' room, and I'm coming out, and there's two other ladies that are coming in. And the one lady was kind of, like, tipsy, but she was also, you could tell she was just tipsy. That was it. Like, she still was making sense. And she grabbed me, like, by the arms, and she said, "Are you here with so-and-so?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You run away." She said, "Do not get involved with him. He's bad news. He's a terrible person. He's done terrible things. Like, do not be with him." And I, like, kind of chuckled, and I was like, well, I've known him, like, my whole life. And she's like, you might think that you know him, but I'm telling you, like, do not get involved with him. And I was like, okay. And so I just, like, got out of her grasp and went my way, and I sat down, and he was like, he saw us, and he was like, what was that about? And I told him, and he's like, she's nuts. Like, I used to run around with friends of hers, and she's just, like, she's crazy, and she drinks all the time. She's here all the time. And I'm like, yeah, right. Like, because I know you, so I'm sure you're a totally fine person, and she's the one that's lost her mind. So my third red flag should have been one day when we had plans, like, that evening, and he called, and he was like, just come over to my place, because I am not feeling that great. And I was like, okay. So I went over to his place, and I was asked, like, how's your day or whatever, and I come to find out he had just, like, quit his job, and he didn't have anything, like, lined up. He just quit, and he just, like, got sick of working there. And so I, in the meantime, do not understand that, because here I, like, have a really strong work ethic, and I, at that point, was still working, like, 2 jobs. And so I'm just thinking to myself, like, how can he afford to do that? Like, what is he gonna do? And so I thought that was really weird. It was just very, very weird. But it wasn't, obviously the red flag was not red enough or big enough or something, because he, like, we made plans for the weekend and he was going to come over and have dinner at my house, and he did, and then he literally never left. So he came over to my apartment, he had dinner, and then he stayed, and then, like, I went to work the next day and I came back and he was, like, just still there. And then, like, the third day I was like, so what is, and he's like, oh, you know what, I need to probably like, just, like, we need to just keep hanging out. I really, like, care about you. I really want this to be, like, a thing. And so basically he was just like, I'm moving in. And I just was, I don't know, young and dumb, or felt maybe I felt flattered or something. But, you know, I'd known him for years, and he was, like, a nice looking guy at that time. And just, so I was like, okay, yeah, that's great. Like, we both know each other very well. We have a lot of history and things in common. So he just kind of, like, moved in. And then he did start working, like, part-time as a bartender. And I came home, and then I was home one day, and this all happened within, like, 2 months. Yeah, it was like 2 months. And I came home one day and I was standing in the kitchen, and he was talking about, like, his dad, because his dad was starting to get cancer treatment, and he was really upset. And he said, you know, I've got to do something, because I've got to get back in the organization because I have to take care of him. And I was like, yeah, like, I understand. And then he's just like, we should just get married. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, we should get married because, you know, with your family, you know, I love and miss your family. And, like, don't you miss your family? Don't you miss them? And, you know, we should do that. And I was like, yeah, but, like, is that the only reason? He's like, oh, no. Like, you know, I love you, obviously. And I was, like, thinking to myself, does he? Like, is that the most hearty, like, I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you? But at the same time, I had always, not always, but I obviously had some kind of, like, crush or feelings for him. And so I thought, you know, what they say in the organization is that basically no matter who you are and what your personalities are like, as long as you're full souled in your service to Jehovah, and you both work really hard in the organization together, like, you can make a marriage work. Like, love is, like, the third most important thing. Like, the emotional attraction to another person is downplayed, because you should instead be more concerned with what their goals are and what they want to do in the organization and how they want to grow as a witness. And so I am still mentally in, and so that's kind of how I approach it. So we actually talked that night, instead about wedding plans, we talked about, like, what spiritual goals there would be. Like, after we got reinstated, like, would we want to get back to pioneering? Would we, like, all this stuff. We went down the list. So, we got married. We got married, like, 5 weeks later, or 4 weeks later. I think it was less than a month. We just went to the courthouse and got married. And we got married on a Tuesday night, and the next meeting at the Kingdom Hall was on a Thursday. Up till then, we were not really going to the meetings. And so we go to that first meeting together to my old hall. We go together, we show up, and then we just keep, like, regularly going. And then the elders, of course, approached us pretty quickly, and then they came to the house and had a shepherding call, and we had let his parents know. And we had like let someone in my family know so that the rest of the family knew. And we, within, I think it was 6 months, we were both reinstated. Now, this was like my first time being disfellowshipped. It was his second time that he was disfellowshipped. But because we were married and we had taken all these steps and like he knew how to spin a good tale, we were both reinstated pretty quickly. I mean, it was like 6 months. We were back in. And it was this big, like, all the joy in all the world. And I remember that meeting because, like, you come in and nobody can talk to you. They're like, look away. And you sit down and you're, like, minding your own business, like, attentive through the meeting. All my stuff was studied, even though you couldn't comment. Like, I mean, I was 110% in. And then they announced that, you know, we've been reinstated. His name first, then my name, because, you know, men first. And then they like end that part of the meeting, and then there's the song, and then there's the prayer, and you're like, amen. And it's like everyone that had shunned you turned in from these cardboard cutouts to like 3D, you know, mannequins of themselves. And they're like, oh, welcome back. We're so happy. Tell us, you know, how'd you guys get together? And it was just, it's wild to think that I believed that that was true, like, love and compassion, when it's just programmed. Like, you're programmed to turn on and turn off your emotion for other people at the right time. And so the right time was we had been reinstated, so all of a sudden they could flip the switch and be nice to us and, you know, talk to us. So we reinstated, and then I'm thinking, like, my life is going to be so good, like, we're going to do all these things and it's going to be so great. And you know, my family was thrilled. I was back with my family. My family who lives in other states had flown back to see me, like, immediately to stay with us. And it was like, you know, they compare it to, like, the resurrection, right? Like, someone died and they're resurrected. And honestly, it is kind of that sensation. It's like, you know, I have a sister who was like, all of a sudden, you know, things went from black and white to color because you're, like, back in our lives. And it was really, really, it makes you feel really heady and really just walking on air. But looking back on it and realizing that it's all just very controlled, and really they didn't have a choice, honestly, it pretty infuriating. So we're both reinstated. I am still working, but my career had taken a little bit of a shift. So I was in a same line of work, but I was working at a different company, and it was a better job. So I had, like, weekends off, and I was making a better living, but I did commute. I had to commute 1 hour each direction for work. So that was a little tough, but I really enjoyed my job. And during this time, he has been just kind of working on and off, like, odd jobs. And honestly, I can say part of me did not really think twice about that, because it's so ingrained in you that if you're going to be a faithful witness, you have to work basically as little as possible to make ends meet, because you need to devote all of your time to service. So kind of ingrained in me that as the spiritual head, he should be spending most of his time in spiritual matters and just working a little to help provide, that initially it didn't really impact me too much, even though I'm, like, robbing Peter to pay Paul because I'm stretching that budget, like, so tight, because I'm now supporting both of us. But that didn't really anything in me right away, because I thought, well, you know, he's reinstated, he wants to pioneer as soon as he can. So he's just kind of showing what he can do, because he would go in field service like twice a week and then on the weekend. And so I was like, he's just showing what he can do. And so I need to just support this. And for myself, I thought, well, I'm kind of in too deep to my career at this point. Like, I can't just walk away because then we won't have anything. So I had this kind of push and pull for myself. But then it just kind of kept going, where he would work less and go in field service less. And like, we never really had personal or family study together, like hit and miss. And I would always be studied for the meetings. And I'm working like 40 hours a week plus my commute. So that's basically 50. It was about between 50 and 60 hours a week, keeping the house, doing all the cooking, doing all the cleaning, and getting my spiritual like studies in. And so then I started to think, like, what is he doing with this time? The other layer on it is that about 6 months after we were married, right after we got reinstated, and this was very, very planned, right after we got reinstated, he started acting kind of like off, like short-tempered, not talking very much. So I just kind of confronted him and asked like what was going on. And then he said he had to admit something to me. And that was that when 2 years, I think, before we got together, he would have been in his 30s. He was sexually inappropriate with a minor. So somebody who was 14. And then it kind of all made sense why he was so sympathetic to my brother. So supposedly that was like the only instance, but I to this day kind of wonder, shouldn't say only. Come to find out, the lady who stopped me in the bathroom before he and I were officially together was the mother of the minor that he had been inappropriate with. Ladies, listen to those drunk women in bathrooms. I'm telling you, like, listen to them. So I was shocked and horrified, but we both are reinstated. And so I talked to the elders, and the elders were just like, we know, like, he had, that was part of his committee, and that's part of the things he's been forgiven for. And it was before you were together, and so you don't have grounds for separation or divorce because, that wouldn't apply. So you'd be, like, disfellowshipped again. And I was literally, like, trapped. I felt trapped. And then he was, like, very apologetic and, minimized, of course, the action. And so I just had to, like, push through. And I'm really kind of disgusted still with myself to this day over that. But at the same time, it was another layer of somebody who is the same manipulative carbon copy cutout of every other man in that organization that I had dealt with my whole life. So I really didn't feel like I had a voice. I didn't feel like I had a choice. And I just had to forgive and forget. So, after that, we move out of the apartment we were in, buy a house. He starts working, but like full time. And then he has like a man cave in the basement. And so he starts spending more and more and more and more time there. And then I'm noticing, like, all the alcohol in the house is disappearing within, like, a day. Like, it would just, like, I'd have something there and it'd be gone. So I start figuring out he's literally, like, coming home from work, eating, doing a couple little things, and then going down to his man cave in the basement and drinking all night, like all night long, every single night. And then he would, a lot of times he would just sleep down there too. And then he would get up and he would go to work. And during this time, like his personality started to like shift a little bit. So he was always known as like the comedic relief. He was the class clown and he had to be the center of attention. In any conversation, in any room, he was loud. He was kind of loud. Like, he wasn't super loud, but he was loud enough that you knew that he was there. And like, he had this big, huge, obnoxious laugh. And so he continued to be like that, but then he started getting like a little more biting in his like sarcasm and his jokes about me or to me. And it was just very, very gentle, slow decline. Like, it wasn't a rapid thing that I noticed overnight. And I started thinking like, this is a little weird. Like, I need to confront this. So I did. I confronted him, and I, laid out like what was like what I felt and everything. And he's like, well, if I'm honest, I've been like talking to somebody at work. So then I find out he's like has basically a girlfriend at work. I mean, they are texting and talking all the time, and then they have made out a few times, and so I'm really mad. And so I say, like, you have to tell the elders. And he snickered and he goes, oh, I don't know what good that's going to do. And that, I haven't done anything that's going to give you grounds for anything. And it's not anything bad enough that's going to get me into any kind of trouble. And kind of in that moment, I thought, like, okay, I might have married like a psychopath, because he knew exactly like what he was doing. But then and then he very quickly like apologized. And he's like, I didn't mean it that way. I'm just saying, like, you and I can work through this. We don't need to involve them. And so we have this fight on Sunday morning, and our meeting is at 1:00 on Sunday. So then we go to the Kingdom Hall. One of the elders notices that I'm upset. Like, I didn't comment. I'm just like, and I commented all the time because I was like an overachiever with everything. And so, the elder like approaches me and he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, you need to just ask him. And I just threw him under the bus at that point. So he had to say something. So he goes off and he says something. They go and they talk in a room, and I'm waiting. And then they come out, and he comes up to me and he's like, okay, let's go. And then the elder's like, looks at me and he's like, I'm really sorry, just take care of yourself. And we leave. And I'm like, what's happening? And he goes, well, just what I told you. He's like, nothing. They just said, basically it's like, I shouldn't have done it. And I can't like comment for 3 weeks. I think it was like 3 weeks or a month. But that's it. And nobody like met with me. None of the elders were like, this is how things deteriorate. Nobody was like, is there anything else going on? It was just like, take care. So again, I was made to feel like I am making a mountain out of a molehill, and I just needed to minimize, like just ignore, minimize, whatever. So things, of course, just continue to escalate. And one night, it's the night before we had to go and leave for our assembly, which are the like twice annual meetings where they have like all these different congregations come together. It was the night before we had to leave for it, and it was like a 2-hour drive there, and he's just gone. He's like not home. It's so weird. And he didn't like respond to a text because he had like a work phone. So he didn't respond. I called, he didn't pick up. So it gets late, and I'm like, well, I get everything around for the assembly like a good Christian wife, right? Like, I have all of our clothes ready. I have our lunch packed for the next day. I have everything all lined up, ready to go. And so I'm like, I'm just going to go to bed because it's like 10 o'clock. So I go to bed. And he finally comes in at like 1 in the morning, absolutely hammered. And he turns the light on in the bedroom and he just starts like screaming at me. And I mean, like, the most. It was funny because when he would be in those states, he would be very clear. Like, he wouldn't slur his speech. He wouldn't. But he would just be like red in the face and all puffy. And he would just, I mean, lose his mind. And so he's screaming at me and he's cursing at me and he's calling me names and telling me how I think I'm the important one just because I work full time. And I mean, literally woke me up from a dead sleep with these like hurling accusations at me. And I did not know what to do. And he's like slamming doors and slamming things and just going on this verbal rampage. And then he like, so I get up and I like leave the room and he kind of follows me throughout the area, like just keeps going and going. And so I just like sit on the couch and then he stops and then he just goes back to the room and he just goes to bed. Like, he just passes out. So I get up the next morning for the assembly and I go back and I like wake him up. I'm like, we have to leave. And he's totally hungover, absolutely reeks of alcohol. And he never like apologized. So on the way there, I'm like, are you going to like say anything about last night? And he's like, oh, I don't remember everything I said. It's fine. I didn't mean to like drink that much, but it's, it won't happen again. It's fine. So I'm like, okay, I guess this is just, this is a one-off, right? So then a couple of weeks later, couple months later, we have a vehicle accident. Some guy hits us, and I was injured in the accident. Not terribly, but I was injured. And so I was prescribed muscle relaxants and a pain med. And so I took my medicine home, and he wasn't injured. They didn't like do anything, but I had x-rays and I had bruised bones in my legs and stuff. So it was a lot of pain. So we went home, and I've never been like a big pain med person. So I only took one of my pain meds through my whole recovery. And I had those and my muscle relaxants, like in a cabinet. And so when like 3 days later, he's like, hey, because we had friends, really good friends who were witnesses, and they had a hot tub. They had a pool and a hot tub. And he's like, hey, I talked to them, like, why don't we go over tonight, because it was on a weekend, and we'll get in the hot tub, and that will, like, help your legs and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. So we go over. Friends of ours liked to indulge in alcohol, too, what Jehovah's Witness doesn't. And so we have a couple drinks. I have like 2 drinks all night. And he has quite a few. And so I drive and I get us home, which was a rarity because even when he was inebriated, he usually insisted on driving. So we get home and we go in we go in, and all of a sudden like a switch was flipped, and he just does the same thing. He starts screaming and yelling, except this time he's punching the walls, and he punches like 2 holes in the wall, and he's like getting like really close, like physically like over me, and I didn't know like what to do, and so I just kind of like slithered away, and he's just on a rampage. He's throwing stuff in the house, he's kicking stuff, calling me awful names. And finally he like just passes out, and the next day he sees the holes, and he's like, then he's very apologetic, and he's like, well, it's because I was on the pain meds too. And I'm like, what do you mean? And so he had been taking my pain medicine. And so I go to look, and it was gone. He like polished off a bottle of pain meds in like 3 days. And he's like, well, I took some. And I was like, those were mine. Like, why did you take them? And he wouldn't even like address it. And he was just like, but it's, I got like that because I mixed them with alcohol and I should have known better. I didn't think about it. And I'm really sorry. And he apologized. And it was this big deal. Like every other person that acts like that. And I was just like, okay, well, you can't ever do that again, and blah, 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 and then, like, just move on from there. Well, obviously, a pattern had begun that I did not realize was a pattern. And it would always come down to, like, we need to just pray about it together. Didn't want to tell anybody, just wanted to, like, handle it together. So then, in a very rapid succession, okay, back to back, his dad passed away of cancer. And then my dad his health declined poorly, very rapidly. And he ended up in a nursing home, and he eventually passed away as well. But during this time, he was in a nursing home for 2 years. And so we have this added stress on us. So my dad was still disfellowshipped when he died. Myself and my brother were the only two that were physically in the area. So I continued to take care of my dad, even though he was disfellowshipped. Like, I still was there to take care of him, even after I was reinstated. My relationship with him didn't change. Because during that time that I was disfellowshipped, he and I had gotten really close. Like, we tried to make up for some of the damage that was done when I was a witness and he was disfellowshipped when I was young. So we had gotten very, very close. And so I just continued to take care of him after I was reinstated. Also, my brother was still disfellowshipped when I got reinstated, but I very, very, very soft shunned him. Like, we still talked pretty regularly, but I would always do something like give him a magazine after so that I didn't feel as guilty. But, like, I just could not bring myself to cut ties with my brother. And so that was, like, thrown in my face all the time by my now ex-husband. He would bring that up all the time. Like, you're probably, what do you say? You're probably making the Holy Spirit not able to fully impact our lives together because you continue to talk to John. Like, maybe if you actually did what you were supposed to do, our lives would be better and we wouldn't have as many hardships, blah, blah, blah. That was like, he'd love to throw that in my face. And then when there would be days where I'd be like, this, like, he's like all that I have, like, he knows it. He'd be like, your brother hates me. And I think to myself, yeah, he does. And has every right. But I never said that out loud. So this has been, like, we've been together then for about 4 years. And we have the house, and he's had a few of these incidences of, verbal assault. And, I mean, it's domestic violence when you throw things and intimidate. Like, that's what it is. And so one day he comes home, and he tells me that they're doing cutbacks at work, and he lost his job. And so he's not going to be working. And I was like, we had 1 year of him working, and during that 1 year he flandered around on me, because that's the other thing. The first time that he went to the elders about making out with this girl and everything was just one time. It actually happened 2 more times after that within like a 1.5 year span. But I had to keep forgiving him because I didn't have enough grounds. There was no penis and vagina, so I didn't have enough grounds to get divorced. So so he's not working. So he then starts working somewhat with a elder in our hall who he was really good friends with, who worked construction. And so he starts doing that. While he's doing that, he's still collecting unemployment because he's not turning in that he's working or collecting wages. So he's making some money, also collecting unemployment, and refuses to give me money. Would refuse. And I would have to pay his bills, including his credit card. And 1 month I missed paying his credit card on time because I was too busy trying to literally keep the lights on. And he he lost his mind. Like, just called me at work, yelling and screaming, there's now going to be a late fee. And I'm like, and I said, well, what do you care? Like, I'm going to be the one that pays it. And he's like, yeah, but, this is going to impact my credit. And I have always had bad credit, and I wanted to work on my credit. And I'm like, maybe you could pay it. Like, it's in your name. Like, you can pay it. So we had tons of financial trouble, and he told me, he used to tell me, I would be in tears. I'd be like, I just need like $200 so that I can pay, the insurance or whatever it was. And he would be like, you work too much. You work too hard. You need to tell them to give you a raise. That was his answer. Like, I needed to work harder or to get my job to give me more money. And I'm like, that isn't the way that this works. So, he also, I mean, that in and of itself probably could be a whole video. The things he did financially that were sketchy that I ended up literally paying for years later, is just, I mean, it's enough to make my blood boil. Like, it's just unbelievable. And so it was almost like a game to him, I think, but it was another way to exert control. And I was so busy, like, working, because then I would just work harder, and I was miserable at home. So I didn't want to go home. So I would work overtime. So I would sometimes be gone like 70 hours a week, but then I was still getting everything done at home I was supposed to, and I was still getting all the meetings, and I was still making it in field service. So as soon as he loses his job and he's working like construction and doing whatever else little stuff on the side, his alcohol consumption becomes even greater. And then he like gets to be almost like reclusive. Like, I wouldn't even hardly see him because he would just like live in the basement. And then when I did see him, his like sarcasm and biting humor towards me just got to be extremely intense, and finally got to the point where, like, even when we were public, because up to a point when we would be in public or we would be like around people, he would censor himself. But then it's like he kind of stopped censoring himself, and more people started realizing like he was not always being very kind to me. And I had grown up with some dysfunction. Of course, my dad being disfellowshipped and my mom a witness, like, there was always some discomfort, but my parents never, like, I did not grow up with my parents like yelling at each other or even being like hateful, verbally like hateful. And my family, we tease each other, like, we're very sarcastic and very funny, and we tease each other, but we never were like to the point where it hurt your feelings. It was just like little stuff like you normally do. But he was getting so intense where it was like just painful. Like, anything that came out of his mouth was an insult. And so I was just getting like worn down and worn down and worn down. And like, I just could not, because the elders, like, I would say something to them, and their answer was always that I needed to work with him more to get him to, do more family study, and, I needed to pray more about it so that he could pray with me. And there was never like a real solution. And he was never like, I was never told like he shouldn't be doing that. Never. Like, the elders never said to me, I'm really sorry to hear that. He's completely wrong. You should not be treated this way. Here, you can get some help here. It was just like, I'm sorry that you feel that way. Pray about it. Which is really disheartening when you already are really, really like low. And so my self-esteem had never been high my entire life. Like, no, not very much confidence. I was awkward, all that stuff. And so it just made me feel like worse and worse and worse and worse, to a point where like I just did not have I had no ego. I had no self-confidence, nothing in me. And so then he and I decide I have to go to California for business one year. And so he is going to come with me. So we're going to make like a trip out of it. And then at the end of my business part of work, we were going to go up to Northern California for a little while, because it was on our anniversary as well. That was the other part. So we go out. I'm at conferences and stuff during the day because it's work for me. And it's my last day, and I'm finally finished with work. In the meantime, he's running all over the city. He's like going to the zoo. He's going to museums. He's like doing what he wants, which that's fine. Like, whatever. I'm there like working. But our very last night, and I'm exhausted. I've gone conference from morning till night, a couple business dinners. So I'm like ready for this to be over and to move on to vacation the next day. So we go out to dinner together because it was like our anniversary. And of course, he was pre-gaming in the hotel. I got back from work, got all cleaned up and changed, and then we go out to dinner together, and we get like a bottle of wine or something, and he is drinking like in addition to that. And so we eat, and then at the very end of the meal, he had like an anniversary gift, I think, for me, and maybe I did for him, I can't remember. So something like we exchanged gifts. And he literally, like, I'm sitting there at the table and I'm like, oh, thanks, this is great, I love it, whatever. And he like completely snaps in the restaurant, and he starts like low, like keeping his voice low. And that's how I know today that despite all the times he said he didn't know what he was doing because he was drunk, he knew in the moment, because he knew to keep his voice low enough to not like cause too much of a scene in the restaurant. And he just starts calling me like names and telling me how I think I'm so important because I was out there for work. And just because I know all these people and I have to go do all these things, that I'm nothing, and you're nobody, you're nothing, you're still as worthless as anything, and you're still stupid. And like, so I just like get up from the table because I just couldn't deal. So I get up from the table, start walking out, and he's following me out of the restaurant, like just like loud whispering all this to me. And we get outside, and I'm like, okay, will we like, can you just stop so we can go back to the hotel? It's at nighttime in San Diego, which is a good sized city, nighttime. And he just walks down around the corner and gets in a cab and just leaves me in the middle of the street alone. I didn't have anything because I didn't have a cell phone back then. And and just like there. So I had to go find my own cab. I actually walked like all the way back to the hotel. And I'm livid, and I'm also just like crushed because I can just hear his voice like calling me a stupid bitch and like all these things in my head. And so I'm just like, I'm just beside myself. So I go back and I start pricing airfare because I'm trying to change my flight so I can just go home the next day. And I didn't have enough money to do it. It was too expensive and I couldn't do it. And I was forced to like have to go the next day with him on this like trip. And he, of course, immediately the next day, he's like, I don't know what I said last night. I feel like maybe I said some things that upset you, and I'm really sorry. I was just so tired. I've been in the heat all day, and the cocktails just went right to my head. It was an empty stomach. I hadn't eaten because I'd been out. I mean, literally just the laundry list. Like, list everything you can, and it's just flowing out of him. I'm so sorry. And blah, blah, blah. But that was kind of like, there was a part of me that kind of broke at that point. And I knew that like this relationship was not going to be okay. But I had to hang in there because something was going to happen that would give me grounds, but that like emotionally I kind of like was almost pretty much done at that point. So we come back home, and everything just continues. It continues to get kind of ratcheted up, where he's like just more bold about the way that he talks to me and that sort of thing. And so I was just kind of going day to day to work, and my like mental state started to like decline. So I was always very like outgoing, and I love to have people over. So like when I was a witness, like one of my favorite things to do was to host the speakers on Sunday, and or like when the circuit overseer came to like have lunch for them. So I'd have them come over, and because I love to cook, and so I'd make a big meal and, entertain, and I'd have other people over during that time. And that was just like, I loved anything social like that. I was just like very socially inclined. And that started to like wane. And I had some health issues and they started to get worse. And I just did not, I just didn't want to go on anymore. And so I remember this when I found out that he had, like a third time basically cheated on me, which I can say now, but to the witnesses, it wasn't quite bad enough to call cheating, but it was still cheating. I remember like just driving to work, and this is awful, but I remember there would be days that I would go to work and I wouldn't remember getting there, but it was like a 45-mile drive because my stress was so high that I just completely was just going through some kind of weird motion with it. Like I couldn't even remember getting to work. And then I got into a mental state where I literally, contemplated like just driving into oncoming traffic. And I hate saying that, but that is where I was. I mean, I was desperate. And in the meantime, not only am I working all this time, and I feel like because what he would do is he would auxiliary pioneer, which is where at that time, you would put in 50 hours a month in door-to-door service. And I'm working like 70 hours a week, and I'm also stopping twice a week and then on the week, or 3 times a week, and then on the weekend to check on my dad in the nursing home, so to take care of him. And I'm like responsible for paying the bills. And then he's like working part-time doing what he wants. He would stockpile his money from unemployment because he wouldn't help me with the bills. And instead, like, he would buy himself a big screen TV for his basement. But then he's like auxiliary pioneering. And so the brothers are like, oh, he's trying so hard and he's this wonderful example because he's spending all of his free time, in the ministry. And I'm just like hanging on back here. Like, I mean, the level of stress and pain was just unbelievable. And then I finally one day was like, I have to start taking care of myself. So I started eating better. I'd been vegetarian for like 20 years. And so then I went vegan and I started concentrating on, what I was eating. Just like for my health started to turn around. And then I started working out regularly, and that helped clear my brain fog so much. So as I'm doing this and starting to take care of myself, he's just continuing to like decline in the manner he's taking care of himself more and more. And up to that point, he insulted me all the time. Any chance he could get, he would insult something about me. And I was always outgoing and pretty like comedic, but my humor, like, I don't ever like try to be super funny. I will brag on myself a little bit. I just tend to be a little quick-witted, and so I usually have a good funny like comeback or pun, but I try really hard. I don't know that I try really hard. I just never really have done it to where it's at the expense of other people. But, I was always kind of the comedic relief with my friends. I could get my friends to laugh and stuff without like trying super hard, and I was never like the loudest one in the group or anything. But when we first got together, I would like, he would laugh at my stuff and he'd always be like, oh man, that's so funny, you're so funny. But then as things progressed, it's like he got louder and more, it's like he started feeling it was almost like a competition when we were out and about, and he would get really mad if we would be with people and I would make like a group of people laugh. It would really like piss him off. He would clench his teeth and like narrow his eyes, and like I just knew to stop. So he up to then had told me all these insults about myself. But then one day he said to me, when I said, some joke or something at home. He said, I don't know why you think you're funny. You're not funny at all. And inside up to this point, like, I was dying. I was wilting, and I was kind of just a ghost of who I once was. And when he said that to me, there was something. It sparked something in me. And I'm like just stubborn enough deep down that when he said that, there was this voice in the back of my head that said, Johanna, you might believe everything else that he says about you, but you better not believe that, because we know better than that. We know that you are funny. And I didn't say anything back to him, but then I started paying attention, and there'd be times where I would like tell a joke, or I would have some funny thing to say about whatever was in the news, and he would like not laugh, and he'd just stare at me like uncomfortably. But then it would be like a day or two later, and we'd be with people, and he would just regurgitate the exact same thing I had just said, and he'd laugh and carry on when he said it. People would just bust up laughing, and it really, like, I thought I was going crazy. Like, I really thought, I was like, didn't I say that? Like, but didn't he tell me it wasn't funny? Like, it started, like, messing with my head. And so then when he would reiterate to me, like, you're not funny, I would remember, like, wait a minute, but you feel the need to steal my jokes, but I'm not funny? So then I went to work one day, and there was a person that I worked with, and we would just kind of, like, sarcastically, like, kind of banter back and forth. And so he was like walking by my desk, and I said something like funny to him, and he stopped, and he came back, and he was like, man, you're like the funniest person I've ever met. And then he just kept going. And I thought to myself, I knew it. I knew I'm funny. I knew that son of a bitch was lying to me. And so, as crazy as it sounds, as small as that seems, that was like the spark in me that kept me like, we're going to find a way out. This is going to change. Like, you are going to do this. And it was my birthday, and we, of course, as Jehovah's Witnesses, don't celebrate birthdays, but there's a place in town that you can go and you can get a free dinner if it's your birthday. So we were going to go out to eat that night. So I came home, and he wasn't home, and I got around and showered and stuff and like changed my clothes, and he came home. And he came in the door, and like as soon as he came in, the door slammed extremely hard, and I was like, oh no. And it was like the worst rampage like he ever went on. And he was like destroying our house and kicking things and like punching the wall. And then that was like the first time that he actually put his hands on me. So he like held me up against the wall by my neck, and he was like punching the wall next to my face and just telling me all kinds of terrible things. And I was able to get him off of me, and then I just ran, and I had a gym bag that always had like a fresh change of clothes and like toothbrush in it. So I just grabbed it and I just ran out the door, and I just remember leaving the doors open. I jumped in my car, and I had some friends that lived like a mile and a half away, so I just drove to their house because I could barely like drive, and I was like a mess. Of course, they were witnesses, so they took me in, and I did not call the police, and I wish I had called the authorities because it would have totally changed the way that our divorce happened, but I did not, because I did not want to bring reproach on the congregation and on Jehovah's name. So I instead told the elders. There was an elder that lived at the house that I'd gone to. He saw how upset I was. He told me just to stay there as long as I needed for, my safety. And then there was an elders meeting, and my ex-husband was viciously angry that I got the elders involved because he, didn't really do anything wrong in his mind, because he told me repeatedly he was drunk, he had too much to drink, he didn't remember everything that he did, and so I needed to like just forgive him because it wasn't he didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't a premeditated act. It was just, because he had too much to drink. So then I said, well, if this keeps happening because you have too much to drink, you need to stop drinking. If that's what's going to fix it, then that's what you have to start stop doing. So I went away. I like went on a trip for a week so that he would like get himself together. And instead he threw parties at our house and with people and some witnesses and some not, and it was just like he was drunk every day and he never like wanted to change. And so I was like, that like I can't do this anymore. I can't, like I just he's it's just too much. And so then I had a meeting with the elders and I said, I'm gonna get a divorce. Like I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna get a divorce. And they were like, you don't have grounds. And then I really got the lecturing about having to pray with them more. And I was like, look, he is not taking any action. He's not trying to change. He's not giving up the booze. He's not doing any of these things. And just because he's auxiliary pioneering that you see him out all the time in field service, like you don't know what he's like to live with. Like he's, just not good. And at the time, I didn't even recognize that I was living in a domestic violence and verbal abusive situation. I did not know that's what I was living in because I was so overwhelmed, and they don't educate you at all within the Jehovah's Witnesses that that's what those things are. So I was just like, all I could do was say like it scares me, it hurts my feelings, but like I couldn't express the levity of what was happening to me. And they said like, you need like basically, they're reading me examples out of Watchtower and Awake magazines of people who had stayed with their spouses and how they put Jehovah first. He was truly the threefold cord in the relationship, and so they were able to just turn it around and then go to Bethel one day together. And they would not even like offer me support. And so finally, like one of my final things I said to them was, I just have a question for you. If he kills me and I'm resurrected in paradise, since all the things he's done aren't really that bad, does that mean that he'll make it into paradise and I'll still be married to him there? And they were like really upset they were not happy with me about that. And then I told them, like, I went down the whole list because I had written a letter, like I listed all the things because I couldn't even keep track. And I went through even the financial stuff, and I said, he's ruining me like financially too. Like I can't continue this. I can't continue any of it. And they were like, well, we do know that you work a lot of hours. So again, everything like came back to me. And I just remember sitting in the elders meeting and thinking to myself, like, it's so ironic that as a woman in a congregation, you don't have a voice, like you can't take the lead. You have to submit to your headship, which I kept hearing, over and over, like, well, what are you doing to submit properly? And you have to submit. But then when you get into a situation like this, all of a sudden, magically, you're the one that's responsible for like helping them to improve their behavior. It's just you're such a 3rd class, 10th class citizen in that organization. And, if I would have stayed and like died, like what would have happened to him? Would have even been disfellowship then? Or would he just continued to manipulate them with the whole like, I was drunk and didn't mean to do it. I just accidentally had too much to drink. That's what he actually told me the last time that we had this blow up. He said, I accidentally had too much. Like, you're like 42. At that point, he was like 42 or 43 years old. I'm like, at what point do you realize that you need to take responsibility for your own actions? So I left and I went and I stayed with my mom's best friend and started trying to start over, but I didn't technically have grounds, so I didn't get in trouble. I didn't get like disfellowshipped or anything, but I had moved to another congregation because obviously I couldn't go to the same hall as him. So I moved to another congregation, and those elders, you could tell they were just keeping a hawk eye on me, making sure I was doing everything that I was supposed to do. And I tried for a while. I mean, I would go to all the meetings and even in field service some, but I just started to feel like I wasn't really cared about at all. And so I'm staying with my best friend's mom, and who was a witness, and my ex, well, he was still my husband at the time. He would call me, and he would like verbally just assault me, and he used to scream at me on the phone, and he would like through gritted teeth, and he would tell me he was going to make it his mission and goal in life to ruin me in every way imaginable. And he said he knew that I would, mess up, and I would get disfellowshipped, and that would be his first like check mark. And then financially and emotionally, he was going to do everything in his power to destroy me. But that was his favorite like go-to. It was going to ruin me and destroy me. And I was actually kind of glad that he started taking that like verbal assault stance once I was physically out and away, because it really helped me find my courage to be like, no, you are not. Like, I am going to do everything in my power, that even if, I don't care if you make me go bankrupt, like, you are not going to steal my soul. You're not going to steal my joy and my life. Like, worse things in my life have happened to me than you. And you are not going to be the thing that comes along and ruins me. Like, sorry, Charlie. And he did not. He tried. I could write a book, and I am writing a book about all the ways that he tried, but he did not. I'm happy to say. I'm pretty sure he's living some miserable life somewhere. I don't have any idea where, and I don't want to know. But, I am strong and happy now. But that was the first kind of little itty bitty crack in the facade of my believing that the witnesses were God's people, and the sun rose and set on them, because the way they treated me, you hear stories, and I'd had them mistreat me kind of my whole life, but to literally be broken and crying and terrified and have them tell me that I still didn't have grounds to get this person out of my life, it was like the first crack in my like, this can't be right. And I started then just kind of living my own life, and I started meeting other people that were not witnesses, socializing more with people from work. And I actually started socializing more with my brother, who was disfellowshipped, and eventually led me down a path of doing things that the witnesses don't approve of. And so I started dating somebody who was not a witness, and I wrote a letter as soon as so in the meantime, I had taken action to get a divorce. So I had filed myself, and all that had gone through. And so I was divorced, and then I was counseled about how I wasn't free to marry, because, he wasn't remarried. And so there's no way I could do that, because, I would then be in really serious trouble. And because somebody has to commit adultery. Somebody has to sleep with another person for you to be biblically or spiritually free. And he supposedly hadn't. Whatever. And so, but I didn't care. I started dating somebody actually from work. I was just so, at that point, I still thought that the teachings were like the truth, but I was just so disillusioned with the treatment of the human beings that I didn't really care that much about my conduct. And I started dating someone from work who was the polar opposite of anybody they've ever known. And I started like thinking, this, like, is it real that somebody like treats you nice just to be nice? And I was very guarded. Like, I enjoyed our time together and I liked him a lot, but I was very, very guarded, because I just didn't think, you're told all these things about worldly people and their intentions. And so that was just in my head. And so I just thought, he's just doing this. But once, if things get serious, like, I know I'll see another side of him. Plus, I just come out of a relationship with somebody that's exactly what happened. So my trust in people wasn't exactly the finest. But we started dating, and then I remember clear as a bell, specifically, he finally got me to, like, meet his family, because I was very hesitant with all that stuff. Just, I felt like I had so much baggage. I'm a little bit older than him, and I just felt like this is, they're A, not going to approve of me, and B, like, we are not going to end up together. And so, like, why even go take this step? But I was like, okay, you're really nice. You've been really, really decent and kind to me. So, like, I'll do that. And so I met his family, and we were sitting down to, like, watch a movie, and his mom and dad were there. And I just, like, remember, like, out of the corner of my eye, the way they were, like, talking to each other, and the way his dad treated his mom. And I thought, like, oh, so this guy is treating me this way because this is all he knows. Because he grew up with parents who, like, treat each other with kindness and respect. So maybe all the things he's telling me aren't BS, and he really is just a good, nice, decent person. And so then I kind of, like, let my guard down a little bit. And eventually I felt guilty because I still, like I say, believed the doctrine of the witnesses. And so I wrote a letter to the elders. Again, this is the second time. I wrote, like, a confession letter. I don't know what was going to come of it. Like, in my head, I didn't want to get disfellowshipped, but I also didn't want to bring reproach. I keep going back to that, but it's true. Like, I didn't want to make the witnesses look bad. So I had a meeting with the elders, and we went through everything. And it was almost a carbon copy of the first time I was disfellowshipped, like 12 or 13 years before that. And 14 years before that. And they were like, are you going to stop seeing this person? And I was like, no. They were like, are you going to marry him? And I was like, no. And they were like, well, you can't, like, you can't just do what you want and be a witness. And so I was disfellowshipped again. And I remember being upset, but knowing that it was coming and not being, like, as devastated, except that I knew I knew that my siblings were going to be really upset. So that was, like, that part was kind of hard. But then I was out, and I just remember kind of feeling relieved. And I was, at that point, I got disfellowshipped because I didn't want to make the witnesses look bad. And now, today, I am so grateful that I did that, and I did not, because this was a whole new congregation, and it was in a different circuit and everything from my old hall. So I could have very easily just become inactive and, like, faded away and not been disfellowshipped. But I am so grateful that I was, because I do not want to be associated at all with an organization that treats women the way that they do, that allow the volume of child sexual abuse cases to go on to be mishandled, that preach doomsday, and they are not tolerant to people of other religions, other ideologies, and the LGBTQ community. Like, I did not want to have anything, I did not want my name tied to such hate ever. So I'm really glad that I had so much respect for them back then, that I allowed them to punish me, because if I had just faded, I think it would have been harder to, like, write a letter now and to say I, didn't want to be one anymore. It was hard to, like, lose my family again and to see, like, how they were disappointed and hurt. But I've had to accept that that's not my responsibility. They're the ones picking the religion over me. And so really that's up to them to do that. that wasn't even my waking up. My waking up, I'm going to talk about more, but that was just like kind of the tip of the iceberg of going through that part of my life. It was very traumatic. It took me a long time of like writing stuff down and journaling and reading stuff and watching things to understand that I actually survived domestic violence and verbal abuse. I mean, the amount of like hateful things that were said to me is just mind bending at this point. And I think about like people say, he would always blame it on not remembering or not knowing exactly. But I'm sorry, friends, we've all been a little intoxicated. We've all been to a point where like we know it's not safe to drive a car and maybe the events of the night are fuzzy. But I think most of us can say that when that were to happen, it wasn't 100% of the time where we are verbally assaulting somebody that we supposedly love and care about, to a scale where it's like just not nonstop. I'm talking like not saying a mean thing, but ranting and raving and screaming at them sometimes for hours on it. Like I think the longest was like 2 hours of just nonstop verbal assault. So that's bullshit. Like that's, and like I said, if you connected those dots, like I drink too much, I get mean, then stop doing the first thing. That's a lot, I know. I'm sorry if some of this was triggering. I tried to put that in the body on the outside so that you knew. But all I can say is I'm really grateful I got out of that. And to anybody that's listening to this or watching this and you recognize any of those signs in your relationship or in other relationships, please get help from somebody, a professional, or, confide in a close friend. It's way more common in the organization than people realize, and that's just because there's this encouragement for women to stay with an abuser because they hope that they will fix them or convince them to change their ways. And so my story is one of so many stories, many stories that are worse than mine, or more intense than mine, or whatever, however you want to look at that. But I will say that there is life beyond that sort of abuse, and that at the end of the day, I was not ruined. I wasn't even ruined financially as hard as he tried. I'm in a really good place. I am successful in my career. I am extremely happy. I've traveled and continue to travel and see things and places. I have the most caring, incredible partner in life, and I have extended family that aren't witnesses, an adoptive family from, I've created my own family with friends. I have friends and people in my life who will stand up for me and fight for me more than anybody ever. And that is something, family is who you create. Relatives are just people related to you by blood. And there's a big difference. And you can, you create your own family. And so it's not easy, but it can be done. And I am in a fabulous place now. I am really, really grateful to sit here in front of you and to have the courage to talk about this and that you will have listened. The other thing I will say before signing off is that if you see yourself on either parts of that, so if you see yourself as somebody who's erred and hurt someone else's feelings, I know that my ex, and this is crazy to say, I don't think that he was a horrible person. I don't think that he was. I don't even have like any feelings for him now. I don't feel like, I don't hate him or anything, but I don't care. I mean, it's just, I'm in that negative void, or that like whatever part, because I just won't give him too much of my emotion. There are days that I miss who he could have been in the fact that, like, at one point in time, before we were even together, we were friends, and he was like a good friend. And I'm sad for him that his life became what it became. But I will say that the cult is partially to blame, if not all to blame, for him descending into the misery that he lived in. You know, I know that he was very unhappy. I think for personal reasons of his own, that he was kind of living not his most authentic life, and I think that impacted his alcoholism and obviously some self-loathing, and that comes out in mistreating other people. So, you know, I've reconciled a lot of my feelings about him and laying blame where it goes, which is back on the cult. And they did not provide either of us help or support, you know, professional help or support. So if you're a person who even sees a little bit of yourself in my story or in his story, I just get help and change your life and reach for the happiness, because it is waiting. I promise. It's out there. That's it for today. It was a lot, I know. I have a couple other videos planned. One that's going to be kind of fun and is going to be with a whiteboard and all kinds of hilarious timeline things I've come up with about the organization. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, I will hopefully stay in touch with some of you. Look forward to hearing from more of you. And until that comes, have a wonderful, great, fabulous, cult-free day. Bye, everybody.